Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Nadia Jani, and here are your top stories. Russian attacks on Ukraine kills 4 people and wounds dozens as West ramps up efforts to support Kyiv. The US imposes sanctions on Colombia's president and his family members over drug trade allegations. And world leaders arrive in Malaysia capital for the 47th ASEAN Leaders Meeting. First tonight, at least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured in Russian strikes overnight on Ukraine, local officials have said. The attacks come after Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed for long-range missiles and urged allies to expand sanctions on Russian oil.
Russian missile and drone attacks on Ukraine overnight into Saturday killed at least 4 people and wounded 20, according to officials. Air raids hit Kyiv and Dnipro. The Ukrainian Air Force said Russia fired 9 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 62 attack drones. 4 ballistic missiles and 50 drones were downed, it added. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said Russian missiles and drones had also targeted the energy grid, railroads and homes in Dnipro, Kharkiv and Sumy. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, his country has faced around 770 ballistic missiles and more than 50 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles fired by Russia since the start of 2025 up to 25th October. The final attacks come as Kyiv's Western allies ratchet up pressure on Russia as the war enters its 4th winter. The United States and the European Union announced new sweeping sanctions this week on Russian energy aimed at crippling Moscow's war economy. In this week, US President Donald Trump announced new sanctions against 2 of Russia's largest oil companies. The measures target Rosneft and Lukoil, 2 major oil corporations that help fund the Kremlin's operations. As White House, United Kingdom also imposed new range of sanctions against Russian oil companies. Additionally, in this week, European Union accepted the 19th package of sanctions against Russia. The new sanctions target energy, shipping, finance and trade. Notable measures include the introduction of an LNG import ban, tighter restrictions on the shadow fleet, export restrictions and further restrictions on provision of services. However, EU leaders meeting in Brussels have so far failed to reach a deal on using Russian frozen assets. Russia's Vladimir Putin has branded the oil sanctions as an unfriendly act that does nothing to strengthen Russian-American relations. He also accused the US of escalating the conflict by allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russian targets. Putin warned that such actions would cross a dangerous line, saying Moscow is ready to deliver what he called a decisive response if its territory is attacked. Lastly, leaders of the Coalition of the Willing met in London to coordinate extra pressure on Russia. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte also attended. Japan's new Prime Minister Takaichi Sanai joined the talks online. The leaders called on more countries to implement sanctions against Russian oil companies.
To reply on what you were asked for. No.
US trade talks with Canada have come to a halt after an anti-tariff advertisement was issued by Ontario's provincial government. US President Donald Trump says he has no intention to meet with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney during the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur.
The United States has halted all trade negotiations with Canada. Donald Trump announced the decision in response to a Canadian ad criticising US tariffs. In a post on Truth Social on Thursday night, Trump claimed that the advertisement, which shows Reagan, a fellow Republican, speaking negatively about tariffs as an economic policy, was fake. Trump also said the advertisement was aimed at influencing US courts. In the advertisement, audio and video from a 1987 Ronald Reagan speech are used to argue that tariffs harm workers and businesses. Reagan says in the advert, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes, for a short while, it works, but only for a short time.
And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time.
The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute condemned the ad, saying it misrepresents Reagan's original remarks and was used without permission.
Former members of Parliament and
75 million.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who spearheaded the advertisements, initially defended the campaign, saying Canada and the United States are allies and that Reagan himself opposed tariffs. His government spent about $54 million for the ads to run across major US networks. But by Friday, Ford reversed course. He said company would pause the campaign so that trade talks between the US and Canada could move forward.
With us, as you know, just a few days ago, he won a very big election in Canada.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney did not let the move go unanswered. He said his government remains prepared to return to the table as soon as Washington is willing to talk.
And we stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home.
However, US President Donald Trump said on Friday he has no intention to meet with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney during the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. This marks the second time Trump has pulled the plug on trade talks with Canada. From steep tariffs and fentanyl disputes to offhand annexation threats, the move underscores just how unpredictable and tense US-Canada relations have become.
Malaysia is gearing up to host the 47th ASEAN Summit, which begins on Sunday. World leaders, including US President Donald Trump, are expected to attend as discussions centre on trade and regional security.
Security has been heightened across Kuala Lumpur as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit gets underway. Security personnel are conducting thorough checks at all entry points to the venue, with police cordons restricting access to key areas around the Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre, where the summit will be held. The three-day gathering, beginning October 26th, will bring together leaders from the 10-member bloc, along with key dialogue partners, including the United States and China. US President Donald Trump departed for the 47th Leaders Summit on Friday and is expected to arrive in Kuala Lumpur on Sunday. On the sidelines of the regional meetings, US officials, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, will hold trade talks with a Chinese delegation led by Vice Premier He Lifeng. The Chinese team has already arrived in the Malaysian capital for discussions aimed at easing tensions in the ongoing trade war, ahead of a planned meeting next week between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Established in 1967 during the Cold War, ASEAN has grown into a central force in Asia's diplomacy, helping its members manage disputes and attract investment. Regional security tops this year's agenda, with Thailand and Cambodia expected to sign a broader truce following deadly border clashes in July, a ceasefire partly brokered by Trump and Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. The summit will also feature a session of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the world's largest trade bloc, which covers a third of global GDP. Leaders will discuss the possibility of new members and ways to strengthen trade flows.
Staying on this story, I'm now joined by political analyst John Kovulik to unpack what we might expect from the summit. Welcome.
Thank you.
My first question really is, what do you think will be the main focus of topics of discussion at the summit?
This is going to be a very interesting ASEAN. I've participated before, and they're generally the sleepy cousin to APEC. You have 11 members, because Timor has just become a member of ASEAN. You have 21 members of APEC. APEC is generally the big guys. But here we have a lot of the big guys, including some that aren't members of. They have a cross of about 5 members that are members of both alliances or both organizations. But this time we've got some really heavyweight heads of state and heads of government going to Kuala Lumpur to participate in this event. And so it's it's very much ASEAN on steroids. It's great for the group, but the question is always going to be, it's wonderful when these heads of state and heads of government are in the same room, but the benefit comes from what they do while they're in that room, and that we don't know yet.
Yes, well, it's all very much to play for, and why so many eyes will be on what comes out of those meetings. But I want to just move slightly over to the APEC meeting, because Trump will be meeting with China President Xi Jinping in regards to a number of different issues, but one of them is pushing for a Ukraine ceasefire. Do you think that's something that will work with Trump and Xi Jinping?
It's going to be very challenging for President Xi to walk back support for President Putin. And because, while there are 2 components of what China is doing relating to Russia. One is the visible, so buying oil, for example, and then importing and exporting products that aren't subject to sanctions. But then there's everything else. And everything else generally has to do with some type of military, either component or products that can be used, dual use with military, meaning that China is helping Russia to maintain its ability to continue to fight in Ukraine. And China has a strategic interest in wanting to keep everyone, meaning the countries, the coalition of the willing, NATO, European Union, sort of off kilter. And so he doesn't really have a lot of incentive to give something to President Trump, take something from President Putin, give something to President Zelensky without getting an awful lot in return. And what he might want in return would be everyone agree hands off Taiwan if China decides that it wants to take it by force.
Well, it's one trade of one country for the other, and I'm not sure how those terms actually work. But my other question was another big topic that I'm sure they will be discussing in regards to trade wars between the 2 countries, which have created extra tensions. What do you think Trump might do about that?
He's, as usual, I have a great relationship with President Xi. We're the best of friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But President Xi has been more muscular during the second term of President Trump than he was during the first term. He's learned from President, and he's now hitting back with sanctions of their own. And President Trump, you hear him now more talk about, well, the 157% tariffs we have are not sustainable. Maybe we'll have to compromise. And for President Trump to use the word compromise, that's really telling too. He needs to make something happen. President Xi doesn't necessarily have the same political either constraints or the same benefit coming from reaching a deal with President Trump. So I think President Xi's going to be calm, and President Trump's going to try to buy soybeans. He's going to try to get them with issues relating to rare earths, and then the overall issues. So President Trump is finding himself in a unique position for him, which is he's not the big man in the room. And so they'll have some deliverables, that's likely, but the big stuff, I'm not so certain.
Yes, well, he's definitely going to have to navigate between those particular areas. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for your insight, Mr. Kovulik. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now over 1,000 South Korean protesters have gathered in central Seoul on Saturday to voice their opposition to the US President Donald Trump ahead of his upcoming visit for the APEC summit. To ensure security, police have issued their highest level emergency alert. Protesters said they were angry with Trump for demanding South Korea to pay $350 billion upfront in investment in the US as part of a tariff deal. In July, Trump said the US agreed to reduce duties on imports of South Korean products to 15% to replace Seoul investment. But the US auto tariffs are in place as the countries remain at odds over the details of the investments. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is expected to have talks with Trump next week.
Parts that were made in Canada, Mexico.
The United States has imposed sanctions on Colombian President Gustavo Petro, accusing him of allowing drug cartels to thrive and fueling a surge in cocaine production. The move marks a sharp escalation in tensions with its longtime Latin American ally. President Donald Trump called Petro an illegal drug leader after Petro accused the U.S. of murder over recent military strikes on vessels in the Caribbean. The Colombian president dismissed the accusations as lies, saying his government has seized record amounts of cocaine. The sanctions freeze any US assets linked to the Petro, his family, and senior officials. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has left Israel and will join US President Donald Trump in Qatar. Rubio was in Israel for a 2-day visit to support the implementation of the US-backed Gaza truce, reaffirming Washington's security commitment. Trump and Rubio will meet with Qatar's Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani before Trump heads to Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN summit. Palestinian factions meeting in Cairo have reaffirmed support for the Gaza ceasefire and demanded a full Israeli withdrawal from the enclave. In a joint statement, they called for Gaza's administration to be handed to a temporary committee of independent technocrats and urged the creation of an international body to oversee its reconstruction. The factions also stressed unity within the Palestinian political system and condemned Israeli annexation or displacement in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Argentines are preparing to vote on Sunday in midterm elections that will test President Javier Milei's popularity. The vote comes less than a year after he took office, promising to fix the economy and cut state spending. Milei's government has since faced high inflation, protests and corruption claims involving some closed aides. The election will also gauge support for Buenos Aires province Governor Axel Kicillof, a leading figure in the Peronist opposition party. A strong result could boost Kicillof's chances ahead of the 2027 presidential race. Germany has destroyed 2 of its nuclear plant cooling towers on Saturday as part of their nuclear phase-out plan and under Germany's energy transition policy. 2 cooling towers of the former nuclear power plant in Germany's Bavarian town of Gundraming were brought down in a controlled demolition. The plant had served as an important landmark in the town for nearly 6 decades, bringing numerous new jobs and boosting the local economy. Turning to the region now, and Afghan and Pakistani negotiators are meeting in Istanbul for a second round of negotiation talks to strengthen a fragile ceasefire along their shared border. The talks come after 2 weeks of deadly clashes that killed dozens on both sides. The violence began after a series of explosions in Kabul, which Taliban officials say were carried out by Pakistan. Islamabad accused Afghanistan of sheltering militants and launched what it described as precision strikes on targets across the border. A first ceasefire collapsed quickly, but a second truce brokered by Qatar and Turkey on the 19th of October has so far held. Earlier, we spoke with Ali Latifi, Asia editor for the New Humanitarian in Kabul.
What it really needs is a solid commitment from both sides. You know, for Pakistan to say that we will no longer attack the Afghan side, and the Afghan side to say we will no longer respond in kind, and to prove, for either side to prove, you know, because Afghanistan also claims that Pakistan is harboring so-called Daesh forces. So for either side to prove that they have no connection to these groups. Really what needs to happen is for them to come to an agreement and to an understanding and to come up with real concrete ways to prove that they are abiding by these things. Because so far all we have are statements.
Now, Turkey has conducted a test of a ballistic missile. The launch was carried out by Roketsan, the country's main missile producer. Haluk Gorgan, head of Turkey's Defense Industry Secretariat, announced the test on social media. He said the missile's range and strike accuracy are being improved. Earlier this year, Turkey successfully tested its Tayfun short-range ballistic missile system too. The former Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili was charged with large-scale money laundering. Prosecutors said police raided his home and seized $6.5 million in cash. Garibashvili, who led the country twice, is a senior figure in the ruling Georgian Dream Party. He is closely associated with the party's founder and billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, who remains a key influence in Georgian politics. Garibashvili has not commented publicly on the charges. Armenia and Azerbaijan have concluded peace talks and are now making efforts toward the full normalization of relations, according to Armenia's Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan spoke on a panel discussion held as part of the 4th Ministerial Conference on Feminist Diplomacy in France, where he noted that peace is already established with Azerbaijan and that both countries are making greater efforts for full normalization of relations. That's according to Armenian media. Earlier, we spoke with Murad Muradov of the Topchubashov Center in Baku on this.
Well, the frequency is quite astonishing because, like, we've seen a few big steps made after the Washington Agreement. So, for a NATO event in Yerevan in September, and at that point made a small sensation in Yerevan. And now this week we've seen already 5 people from Azerbaijan coming on a direct flight, to meet with their counterparts in Yerevan and to openly make photos together to speak about peace and make a joint statement. And I also can remember that on this week that President Aliyev said that Azerbaijan sees necessary to lift all the transit restrictions and to start basically allowing all kinds of goods to be transferred, from Soviet countries to Armenia through Azerbaijan. And I know that it made a very big news in Armenia, and it's now being cited as a symbol of the tectonic changes. And I wouldn't expect such a strong pace of normalization even 2 months ago.
The European Union is deepening its engagement in Central Asia and the Caucasus. It's seeking to boost transport and trade links with the region. At a recent meeting in Luxembourg, EU ministers discussed new investments in the Trans-Caspian international transport route. Our correspondent, Fariza Kalimazana, has more details.
The European Union is strengthening its focus on Central Asia and the Caucasus. Following the recent meeting of ministers in Luxembourg, Brussels is ready to step up its involvement in developing the Middle Corridor, a route connecting China and Europe through the Caspian and Black Seas. This route is already being used for transport bypassing Russia, and now the EU aims to expand infrastructure and increase trade flows. Brussels is allocating about 3 billion euros for the development of the route. In total, the European Union plans to invest up to 12 billion euros in transport and energy projects across the region in the coming years. Kazakhstan plays a special role in this process. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has allocated 35 million euros to modernize the port of Aktau, which will become an important link in the Middle Corridor. For the European Union, this is not only an economic project, but also a way to strengthen its political presence in a region traditionally dominated by Russia and China. Brussels hopes that the new routes will help Central Asian and Caucasus countries diversify their ties and reduce dependence on major neighbors. For the EU, this is more than an economic project, but Brussels faces a difficult task, competing with the well-established influence of Moscow and Beijing. China remains the region's largest trading partner, and Russia's political presence is still tangible. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
To Turkey now, where in a mountain village of Ziyarat, one family's beekeeping success is bringing new life to a once deserted conflict zone.
In the steep and quiet village of Ziyaret in Turkey, one family's business is quite literally buzzing with life. İsmet Akoyun and his family run a beekeeping operation that produces pure, additive-free honey shipped to customers across the country. Akoyun fled his homeland in 1993 amid terror-related evacuations. After the area was secured through successful military operations, he and his family returned permanently in 2012. He rebuilt the home that had been destroyed and began a new chapter, beekeeping.
The village remained empty for a while. I returned to support my family's livelihood. We tried to make use of our land with our own means. Before it was restricted for security reasons, we couldn't travel freely and had to get special permission. In 2012, when the road to our village was built, I constructed a concrete house. After that, we planted our fields. Since the honey here is of exceptional quality, I started beekeeping after building our home. Now, we have nearly 500 traditional and modern hives. Our livelihood depends on caring for the bees as a family.
The Akoyuns are the only family living in the village, perched 2,500 metres above sea level. Their thriving business produces up to 2.5 tonnes of honey each year. İsmet hopes more families will return to bring renewed life to the community.
Life in the village used to be great and it was densely populated. Many people lived here. Living alone in the village can be a bit dull. It gets lonely with no one around. If everyone came back, the village would be livelier and productivity here would increase.
With the help of his wife and 5 children, İsmet continues to live in harmony with nature, surrounded by steep mountains in the peaceful village of Turkey's Bitlis province.
That honey looks very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That's your news update for now. Make sure you stay tuned to A News. Take care.